this is like sort of 2004, 2005, the brands had gotten so big. All of the brands had gotten so big, whether they were public or just giant or acquired. There was a pressure to be big, and that's what happens when you take money on, whether you have investors or you go public. That's the game. And surf culture in the late 90s and early 2000s had gotten big. It had really kind of gone beyond the borders of California and the East Coast and had infiltrated, the middle of America, so much so that they started brands like Hollister, and it had become big money. Everybody wanted to live at the beach. It's a cultural moment. And I just felt like those voices that I heard down at the beach talking about traveling and adventure and surfing and irreverence, they had sort of just passed us by. The brands weren't really talking about it. The athletes were, there was a few out there. There were the Rastas of the world that were out there wandering, but I just felt like the brands weren't speaking to me. They were building clothes for somebody else. They were marketing stories that were much more about the act of surfing and being broader and broader and broader, which is cool. I mean, it is the surf industry, right? Surfing is what we do. But I just feel like there was a lot that was being left out of it, and maybe so much so we had to invent a fictional character to tell the story again. So, and for me, that was the white space. It was about how can we get back to those stories I heard on the beach. It inspired me ultimately to go to Europe and to do all these things with my life and continue to travel and continue to dive into the back alleyways, jump on motorcycles. And I just felt like at that time, somebody needed to start telling those sort of stories about adventurism, and maybe from a different POV, not one that was just purely surf centric, that was just a little bigger and broader, but in a good way. The first 5 years of Roark, it was all about the storytelling. It was all about documenting these trips. It was all about going places and bringing back inspiration to create the clothes. But it was almost like, I wouldn't say an afterthought, but it was like the second priority. So in a lot of ways, I wanted it to be a content brand that made clothes.
Yeah. Let's talk about pieces. Like, what were the first pieces that you made? Mm-hmm. And also, I know you were talking about centering the kind of whole thing around travel. Mm-hmm. What was the first trip? And did the first pieces come directly out of that trip? How closely tied are all those things? Yeah,
it was a concept from the beginning. Obviously, money was tight. And, I really started it literally in the advertising office by myself for the first 6 months. So I got some friends together and we did a trip to Baja.
Okay.
And wrote about it through the eyes of this character, Roark. At that point, made basically T-shirts and hats. I think I went out literally and bought blank or vintage military jackets, mm-hmm. and screen printed on them and put some buttons and patches on them, embellished them, sort of made them our own. But the first year was really just kind of T-shirts and hats. It was kind of like a little experiment to see if the thing would work. And as it sort of, took hold, the trips got a little bit bigger, dabbled in the cut and sew, I think at the end of the first year. And just got deeper and deeper into the trip.
How are you marketing the brand, and who are those products going to?
So I always looked at Roark as an adventure lifestyle company, which isn't really a thing. It's not really a category. You have outdoor, you have action sports, adventure lifestyle. I don't know if anybody categorizes himself that way. So it was always, to me, going to be someone that was a little bit older. I wasn't really trying to market to 15-year-olds. Very early on, there was a lot of whiskey drinking, a lot of smoking, a lot of more mature subject matter too. And I felt like when you're talking about travel, you don't really get traveling in life until I think kind of your mid-20s, most people, right? You need a little bit of money to do it. You got to have some time. So I always felt like it was a little bit, it would be like your target demographic would be more like the 25, 30, something like that, as opposed to like 14 to 18 to 20, which a lot of brands in our industry will focus on heavily. So at that time, magazines were still a thing. Had some relationships there, and we're doing ads, and we printed this zine called the Artifacts Journal. So that was kind of like our main deal. We'd go on these trips. I'm an art director, so I'm like super visual. I always really cared about the photography, and I love to write too. Hired out a lot of the writing, and we'd put together a zine, and the zine would be just the documentation of the trip. So although the stories were sort of fictionalized, the narrative was based on I'd say like half of what we did on the trip, and then half was pixie dust, and sort of like go back to all the stories of friends, just amalgamating all of that together into adventures that were sort of in this novella form that I think everybody obviously knew wasn't completely true. They were far-fetched. We used to call them rumors, myths, legends, and lies. Mm-hmm. So we tried to create this mythos really around this character, and so those zines we would distribute to all the stores. So whenever we'd launch a product line, it would come with the zines. If you read the zine, you'd have sort of bits and pieces and nuggets that explained where all the inspiration came from, a bar fight to a local artisan that we met along the way. So those were really, those artifact zines were like the key kind of like hub to the whole thing.
Yeah.
They were on, obviously websites were a thing, maybe like 3-4 years in, Instagram became a thing. So we started to digitize it, I guess, in some ways. Again, as an art director, I was always a fan of like real things, paper, print. So that we did it for a long time. I think about 5 years in, we'd come back from these trips to Nepal or wherever, like pretty far-flung places. Usually, I think there was only a few trips. We only done like 2 trips where there was no waves.
Oh, okay.
But Western Russia, Vietnam, just places that were sort of like off the good hunting. We were hunting waves, and we got waves here and there. But we kept coming back, and everybody was like, "What was it? Like, tell me about the trip. Tell me about the trip." Like, it started to be more about like us. And by us, this was like myself, and then Ryan Sirianni, who's co-founder of the brand, who came on like year 1.5. Like, we were going on the trips, and I was taking photos of him. Next thing you know, we got a couple friends to come along. Jamie Thomas joins us, skateboarder. We had Nate Zoller, Jeff Johnson, Parker, Harrison Roach. Now, like, we started bringing on actual like great surfers, and people started to care like less about these like novellas that we were writing and more about what really happened. And at the same time, Instagram was a thing. So we didn't change the model at all. We just kind of left the fictional story behind and sort of used the character as a guiding light. And at that point, we had great storytellers that were part of the brand, and people kind of they cared.
Interesting.
Right? They wanted, we had all sort of moved to real, I think, at that point. And so it was a big decision, because we were having a hard time. How do we market a fictional character?
Sure.
Right. And tell a story. I think we did some interesting things, but it became harder and harder to do that as the medium changed and such. So that was a big change.